Hey everybody, my name is Kayla, and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. Happy Halloween, late Halloween. I'm recording this on Tuesday because, oh my gosh, everything was so hectic. We had a crazy weekend, partially lazy, and you don't want to record, but it's also hard with my husband home and my kids home. So, yeah, Monday, oh my God, it was insane. But it was fun. My husband even dressed up. I was Eddie Munson, and my husband was Hopper when he was in the Russian jail. So I will post those pictures on my Instagram because I was pumped about my outfit, you guys. And then, of course, we had a Spider-Man and a Black Panther also, which one of the houses gave out mustaches, fake mustaches. And my youngest son, who was Black Panther, ditched his mask and put on a mustache for the rest of the time, and people were dying. They just loved it. They were like, he's so funny, oh my gosh. And every time he'd come home, come back to us, he was like, Mom, they really liked my mustache. They were like, hey, nice stash. I'm like, oh God, he's 6 years old. So it was so funny. They had such a good time. We all had such a good time. So it was a great Halloween this year. Lots of candy. And my oldest, has a peanut allergy. So Halloween is tough, especially on him, especially when they let him pick out candy or, either way they put candy in his bucket. He can tell he can't have M&Ms, he can't have Snickers, like all those. And it was a lot this year of candy he can't have. So it can be a bummer, but if that's the case, we usually treat him with something, or he still gets a good amount of candy, but still, it's always been kind of a bummer. But yeah, it was very fun. We're exhausted. My kids are exhausted. And then this morning, our power went out for almost 2 hours, and that was fun. So school was delayed, so I couldn't record this morning. It's like noon on Tuesday, and I'm recording, trying to get this out as quick as I can. So that's probably enough about me. Also, guess what? I am getting a new computer. Thank you to all of you for your support. And, I don't earn a lot of money from doing this. But I do get a little bit from the sponsor and from donations. Obviously, it's not paying for my whole computer, but seeing my numbers go up like crazy, really being committed to this and loving doing this, turning this into my job, hopefully my career. It's really done big things. And so it was time, and I'm finally getting a new computer. It should be here today. So now my son wants to take over my computer and just play Roblox all the time on it. So, yay. Anyways, let's get started. We're going to Delaware today. I know absolutely nothing about Delaware. Well, now I do, but I didn't know what to do. And I was trying to, look around, see all the crazy stuff I could find. I know I'd been doing some hauntings. I hope you liked Brunswick Springs. I just wanted to really throw something different in there. So I hope you liked that one. This one is a spooky one. A lot of activity because this has a lot of history to it. We're going to Fort Delaware, which is in Delaware City. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're new here, I always do a little bit of history about the state that this is in. So we're in Delaware. Then I'm going to do a little bit of history about where in Delaware it's located, which is Delaware City. And then we will jump right into the subject, which is Fort Delaware. So that's usually how it goes. If you're not into the history of the places and just want to get to the subject, jump ahead a little bit. I don't mind at all. And thank you guys for listening to my sponsorship. Sorry, I'm moving around. At the beginning of the episode, it does help me out. So let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about Delaware. It has a very long history. that whole northeastern area is insane. So I definitely tried to break this one down a little bit more, didn't go all the way back. So we're going to start at the Revolutionary War. So Delaware's very tiny. If you can't tell on your map, it's very tiny. So about 4,000 men actually enlisted for the Revolutionary War from this little tiny state. The colonial people there had actually built up militia, and like they had a ton of different types of soldiers and even officers. And so they were people that helped to lead the troops in Delaware during some of the biggest battles of the time, like the Battle of Long Island and the Siege of Yorktown. So if you guys remember, if you've seen Hamilton, some of this will seem familiar. So there was actually only one Revolutionary battle that was fought in Delaware soil, and it was the Battle of Cooch's Bridge, which was near Newark. And this was September 3rd, 1777. So a huge part of the recovery of this state after the war was an invention in 1785 by a man named Oliver Evans, and it was actually the automatic flour milling machine, which, huge. That's a huge invention, literally revolutionizing everything about the industry of making food, I'm sorry I say so many times. I try to edit it out, but sometimes, yeah. So it was blah blah blah. It was the first of the 13 original states to ratify the Constitution, and that was in 1787. And so Delaware got a nickname, quote, the first state. And that is in reference to the new federal union that was forming. So Delawareans are very, very proud of their heritage. They actually honor their traditions still today. And those traditions include what made them the first state to ratify the Constitution. And they're just very proud of what has happened and what all Delaware did to protect our nation and help strengthen it, It's actually the second smallest state in the United States, but it's actually very densely populated. So the state is actually organized into 3 different counties. So it's Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex. And all of these counties were established in 1682. Sorry if you hear my dogs walking around. So the first European colony in Delaware was actually established by the Swedish. They came in 1638, and between like 1698 and 1699, they constructed what is called the Old Swedes Church, which now is known as the Holy Trinity Church, and it's one of the oldest places of worship in America that is still in use today. Some fun facts here. Delaware was nicknamed also, quote, the Diamond State, because Thomas Jefferson referred to it as, quote, a jewel among the states because of its prime location on the eastern seaboard. And if you look at a map, it is, in this very prime location where there's, access to Philadelphia. Excuse me, it's right on the Delaware River and in this big cape, and there's access to Baltimore and New York, and New Jersey. So it's such a little state, but it has a big impact on where it's located. I thought this was a fun fact. The first beauty pageant, which the contestants competed for Miss United States, took place on Rehoboth Beach in 1880, and they used it to attract more business during summer festivals. And the inventor, Thomas Edison, was actually one of the judges. very interesting, I think. So, after World War II started, they had put up some observation towers that were like 39 to 75 feet tall, and they were put along Delaware's coast. And this was to protect the bay and the towns from the German warships coming in. And actually, 11 of them still remain in Delaware, also in Cape May, New Jersey. So, Delaware, the bay is home to horseshoe crabs, and it's the biggest population compared to anywhere else in the world. And how they do it is still like unchanged. They say mostly unchanged for the past 300 million years. And it says these, quote, living fossils were collected by Native Americans for food and used as fertilizer. And it's a practice that was passed along to early colonial settlers and continued until the 1960s. And they actually use these crabs for biomedical research, and they've played a huge role in studying the human eye and detecting bacteria. I don't know the eye thing, but if you're interested in horseshoe crabs and how that works, that's a good one to look up. So, sorry, I'm on my second thing of coffee today, so a little jittery, but it's worth it. So now we're going to jump to Delaware City. So from a website called fortdupont.org, I got some information about it. So a lot of the origins for Delaware City can go back to like 1801, when one of the first families there was the Newbold family. They were from New Jersey, and they had purchased some land, which now is known as Newbold Landing. So they had drawn up plans for a town in 1826, hoping that it would grow to rival Philadelphia. And that's a big one. Because it had river ports and commercial centers and all of that. So Delaware City did grow rapidly because it, is east of the Chesapeake and the Delaware Canal. And so around 1829, it became a huge base for a lot of significant shipping activities. There was actually a huge peach boom during 1840 to 1880, and it made Delaware City famous for peaches, like nationwide. And this was actually started by a man named Major Philip Raybould and his sons. They had over 110,000 peach trees. And so then peaches were shipped from Major's Wharf in Delaware City to the main ports, around like New York and Baltimore. And it's also a huge fishing area. So these fishermen would process their fish and send them from Delaware City and to, again, like the big ports to be distributed. And a lot of the big fish out there are herring, shad, and sturgeon were some of the main ones. And then they would ship the eggs, like the caviar, all the way into like Germany and Russia for, the elites at that time. And they also would hunt muskrat in the area, and it was a huge part of, people's livelihood at that time. And I'm also going to add a little bit about where exactly in Delaware City this fort is. It's actually on an island called Pea Patch Island. You do have to take a boat or a ferry to get to Fort Delaware. So Peach Patch Island is only about a mile long. It's very small, and it's right in the middle of the channel of the Delaware River as it enters Delaware Bay. And it actually started as a mud bank, just, in the river in the 18th century. And then there's this huge folklore that goes around it saying that the island is named after a ship that was full of peas that accidentally ran into this mud bank. And so it spilled all the peas out everywhere. And then all of a sudden, the growth of the plant created this island. So that's why they called it Pea Patch. And then in 1812, seawalls and dikes were actually built on the island with a tower. And by 1814, the island was very significantly developed. And that's when the construction of Fort Delaware started. So, why don't we go ahead and jump into Fort Delaware? That was kind of a short intro with Delaware, but I have a lot of information on Fort Delaware also. So, like I said, it's located in it's so hard to say, Peach Patch Island, which is off of Delaware City. It's pentagon shaped, and it actually, it is there to guard the Delaware River. Nowadays, it's actually a very popular state park, and you can take a ferry from Delaware City to the island. And its busiest time through its history was the Civil War. It was actually a POW camp, prisoner of war, for captured Confederate soldiers. It has a very long history. The island is very strategically placed for putting up the defense of, not only the river and the bay, but also of like the cities of Wilmington and Philadelphia. And that helped keep out the attacks that were coming in. And this fort was actually only constructed out of wood. And we all know what that happens because everything at that time was being constructed out of wood, and it was sadly destroyed by a fire in 1832. But by 1848, the government had found some funds to rebuild the fort, to really make sure they had that fortification in place. And it actually all still exists today, unlike Brunswick Springs, where hardly any of it exists. But yes, it is still there. You can go visit it. So this was very expensive. This fort, very expensive. So the cost of this fort, while it started being rebuilt again in 1848, so the cost of this was $2 million, which in today's money, so this article did not say if that was $2 million then or if it's today's money, but it's about $75 million in today's money, which is wow. And so it was actually built upon 7,000 pilings that were driven into the marsh. And those were definitely for, the structure, keeping it on top of the marshy land. You guys get it. So it was actually completed 11 years later in 1859, and it was actually just before the Civil War started. So this structure is massive. It is huge. When you see the pictures of it, it's big. And it's made of granite and brick. So we all know granite likes to hold stuff in it, The walls are like 30 feet thick, and they can stand 32 feet high. And a lot of the amenities it has is from the 19th century, not amenities, defenses. They had 3-tier guns, and it was actually shaped as a pentagon with 5 small bastions at the corners, and they were like tower ones. And then 4 of the sides were seacoast facing, obviously, and these had 3 tiers of cannons on each side. And so at a point that a total of like 120 really heavy cannons could actually be mounted on these seacoasts, that's crazy how many of them, And then in the back they had like a large, they called it a gorge wall, which had 2 tiers. And so then they it says they had loopholes for 68 muskets. And then you could put another 11 cannons in there. And then in the middle was a sally port, which was the only entrance and exit from the fort. And in that area, it says 20 short range flank howitzers could be mounted to defend that area. And then it had even more. It said it has positions for 169 cannons. It also had a moat with a tide gate on like this canal to control the moat level with the river. Yes. So, like I said, it's composed of granite and brick, but also genesee, I think, and cement. And the first stone that they used was the genesee, and it was imported from Maryland. And then in 1852, a Major Sanders, he said that the genesee was too hard for the stonemasons to be able to cut and shape, and so it was slowing down the process. And so then they started to bring in granite from Pennsylvania, and it is used just throughout everywhere, even like stairways and stuff like that. And then more stone from Maine was used for the large platforms. In 1854, there was a huge storm that took out the island's dike and seawall. And because of these, high tide waters and a lot of threat around them, now along with trying to get this whole thing built, now they had to repair the dike and the seawall again, along with trying to build the rest of it. So slow progress. That's why it's taking 11 years. There were more than 2 million bricks that were used from different places in Delaware and Pennsylvania, and this was for the wall's interior, and it was used to build cisterns, casemates, powder magazines, barracks, officers' quarters. They had a bread oven, and it says the fort's breast high wall, which I don't know what that is, but they also did like these huge arches and different vaults, and they had to do it throughout the entire fort to make sure that the weight of the fort was evenly distributed, because again, they're on a marsh. Even though these have these piles in there to stabilize it, you still have to make sure the whole thing is weight distributed. And then they would use concrete as a layer like above the vaults for more resistance and to have a really strong system in place for it. So again, Fort Delaware was a coastal defense for all those big cities that are inland that people are trying to get to. And it actually started to change into a POW camp. And some of the first Confederate prisoners came in 1862. They were housed inside of the fort, and they would put them in like the sealed off casemates, the powder magazines that they had all built, and then there were 2 small rooms inside the sally port. And in these small rooms and areas, there are actually names of the Confederate soldiers that they had carved into the brick, and I guess you can still see those today. Very, very creepy and eerie. According to an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, it says, quote, "The island contained an average population of Southern tourists who came at the urgent invitation of Mr. Lincoln." And then also, the first Confederate general was taken as a POW and was housed at the fort. His name was Brigadier General Johnston Pettigrew. And through the war, they had about like a dozen generals that ended up being housed there as POWs. So war is going on, and they're getting flooded with prisoners. They had to build more barracks. And again, they were wooden structures and they were built like north of the fort on the island. In 1863, there were 6,000 prisoners there. And that was June. By August, so just a couple months later, there were more than 11,000 prisoners. And then by the end of the war, there were 33,000 men. And so at one point, that island was the largest city in Delaware. Like, oh my God. Like, oh, ugh. And we'll get to the conditions later, but like, that's a lot of people in one spot. So again, different structures were springing up on the island all over the place. So they would build different officer quarters, more barracks. They actually built a church and some commercial structures, which it didn't elaborate on that, but I thought I should include that. So along with these other structures, there was a 600-bed hospital that was built around that time also. And I have a quote here from a Lieutenant Francis W. Dawson, who was a POW in 1862, and he said these barracks were common wooden sheds affording accommodation for about 10,000 people. The bunks were arranged in tiers of 3, and into one of these I crawled. Yeah, just a little snippet from him. In 1864, the War Department actually ordered the fort to start cutting rations because northern soldiers who were in southern POW camps were also being treated extremely poor. And so this was a way to say, look, here, yours are going to be treated just as bad. So they ordered, a cut in rations. And at the time, they were only receiving 2 small meals a day. They were able to purchase extra food from the settler. I didn't look that one up. And they could actually fish off the island. And a lot of records actually show that they got, the prisoners received care packages, which is very interesting. Yeah. So I have another quote from a private Henry Berkeley when he was there. He said, quote, "Things here are not quite as bad as I expect to find them. They are, however, bad, hopeless, and gloomy enough without any exaggeration." Quote, "We went into dinner about 3 o'clock, which consisted of 3 hardtack," whatever. I didn't look up some of these words. Oh my gosh. "A small piece of meat," and he said about 3 bites worth, "a pint tin cup of bean soup." And that was it. And that's part of his quote. And then he also says, "We only get 2 light meals a day." So another quote here from Captain Robert E. Park. He was a part of the 12th Alabama Infantry Regiment. He said, "The mess room is next to Division 22 and near the rear. It's a long, dark room having a long pine table on which the food is placed in separate piles, either on a tin plate or on the uncovered, greasy table, at meal hours twice a day." He continues on saying, "The fare consists of a slice of baker's bread, often very stale, with weak coffee for breakfast, and a slice of bread and a piece of salt pork or salt beef, sometimes alternating with boiled fresh beef and bean soup for dinner. The beef is often tough and hard to masticate." So what these guys are talking about, they were fed 3 meals a day. So now they're down to 2. We hear also from a Lieutenant Francis Dawson of what he experienced. He said, quote, "For breakfast, we had a cup of poor coffee without milk or sugar and 2 small pieces of bad bread. For dinner, we had a cup of greasy water, misnamed soup, and a piece of beef 2 inches square and a ½ inch thick, and 2 slices of bread. This was exceedingly a light diet." Continues, "We contrived to make some additions to our diet by purchases at the settler's store." So some of the high-ranking officers were also POWs, but they were housed in different places. So It included the laundress quarters and an open bay barrack rooms, and these were all inside the fort. And these prisoners were actually treated very different. They could get out on parole a lot easier. They had more food, they had a lot more freedom, and they actually lived very well. They they even these guys actually paid a woman to come do their cooking and cleaning for them and like washing their clothes. Yeah. Very weird. So, a man named Reverend Isaac W.K. Hardy, he was a political prisoner there, and he was living inside the laundress quarters at the time. And he said, quote, "Our supplies have recently been so abundant that commissary tidbits have appropriated in room 3 as a larder and pantry. We have been living upon hams, turkeys, chickens, tongues, jellies, pickles, butter, cheese, canned fruits, and jellies of various kinds, with all else that could be desired for comfort and healthy diet." He further went on to say the only article regularly furnished by the government is bread. Each man gets a well-baked loaf every other day, which is such a quite sufficient quantity. So they were treated so much better. Granted, there were less of them, but still, it's like, they are POWs. It was a very crazy time. But I don't know what else to say. So a Lieutenant Francis W. Dawson, he talks about also his conditions at the time. He says, quote, "We were installed in a large barrack room, which then contained 70 or 80 officers." So he was considered an officer in these quarters. It was for the highest rank, and that also went to Major Holiday. He goes on to say, "Our room was dry, warm, and well lit, while the barracks outside the fort were cold, damp, and dark. Our room had conveniences for washing, and there was plenty of water, but of poor quality. We only left the room to march down into the mess hall." So it's like they were so well taken care of, they didn't even have to leave their room. So it is estimated that about 2,700 prisoners died at this fort. And a lot of it had to do with the outbreak of smallpox that went through. And this was about 1863. Some other deaths included inflammation of the lungs. There were various forms of diarrhea, obviously smallpox, and a lot of them actually died as a result of typhoid and malaria. But there were, a multitude of other causes of death, which included scurvy, which I looked this up because I actually didn't know what it was. So it's a lack of vitamin C. And actually, with that, it has some pretty crazy symptoms, which can be, because of the deficiency, they can include weakness, feeling tired, sore arms and legs. And then without treatment, it actually decreases your red blood cells. You can get gum disease. Your hair will fall out. You'll get bleeding from the skin. And then as it worsens and worsens, the wounds that are being caused will not heal. And then your personality will change. And then you'll actually die from infection or bleeding. Yeah. So a lot of deaths to that. There was also pneumonia. And then this other disease that I didn't ever hear about. It's called, erysipelas. Erysipelas? Sure. And it's actually a form of cellulite. So it's when bacteria can get under the skin. And this can happen from, trauma, insect bites, incisions, ulcers, burns, and, just like cutting your skin or something on something. And so, I'm looking this up and I'm like, so a lot of the things that they were showing was, it like swells up and whatever, but it's very treatable. But then you kind of have to think back, okay, they're a prisoner of war in these terrible conditions, and they get a little scrape on their hand and get bacteria in it, and they could die. No way of getting through it. So that seems like a pretty gruesome way to die. 5 prisoners actually drowned. 7 of them were shot, and during the war, actually, some Union soldiers had also died. Union soldiers and civilians that had died on the island as well, due to what we have listed before. And actually, 300 of the prisoners escaped the island, and some were never seen or heard from again. A few of them were able to impersonate Union soldiers, so they were able to sneak out. There were some that used life preservers made out of material they could just find, and they floated away. And another snuck away on a coal boat, so I'm assuming a boat would come in to drop off coal for their furnaces or whatever, and he was able to sneak away on that. They would bribe the guards. That was very common, but they said it was also very risky because you just couldn't count on them to either follow through or not report you. So there's a famous story that one soldier actually took a body out of a coffin and was able to sneak over to New Jersey, which were where the dead bodies were being buried. And then once he arrived there, he took off. Another claims, and this man was from Florida, he told the guards that he had never seen snow or ice. So he had convinced the Union guards to allow them to go skate on the frozen river. And they were, laughing at this guy who was from Florida, stumbling all over the ice. And he was like, he fell and started sliding, and he was getting like further and further from the fort. And he actually got out of gunshot range, and he just took off down the river. But they say he actually looked like a professional skater. So he totally played them and was able to get away, but they said he was never seen again. In October of 1878, there was a massive hurricane that hit this area hard. There was a ton of damage to the fort and the structures inside the fort, and a lot of the buildings on the south side of the island were just completely destroyed. And then August of 1885, a tornado struck the island, and it destroyed the hospital and, again, massive damage to the structures. And a man named Ordnance Sergeant James Maxwell, he wrote about it, and he said, quote, "A storm took place here. We have had nothing like it since October of 1878, and a strong whirlwind with it, sweeping everything before it, pulling trees out of the ground and carrying parts of the hospital all over the island and out on the river." So after the Civil War, this fort was abandoned until about 1896, where it started to be used again during the Spanish-American War. And, during its abandonment, there were a lot of guns that were stolen and disappeared. And they used this fort until about 1905. And, to World War I, it only had a couple people there. And during World War II, actually. So they, 1943, World War II, they actually had to take a lot of the guns from the area for scrap metal to support the war effort. And the fort was closed down in 1944, and they used it as a surplus property. And then in 1947, it was turned over to the state of Delaware and became a state park. And it's actually said that during the fort's entire history, not one shot was shot. Never fired. In anger, it says. So I don't know if it was just there was never a shot that went off, or take it how you like it, friends. So you can take a ferry to get there. There's a ton of tours and different programs, and you can visit the entire fort. There's nothing that's off limits. And there's also people who will dress up to show off the different roles of the people who were at the fort. Sadly, there's been a lot of beach erosion for Pea Patch Island, and that threat was actually recognized in 1999. So the Army Corps of Engineers came in and built a 3,500-foot seawall in like 2005, 2006 to help protect the fort. And with all that history, I'm sorry that was a lot of history, the fort is set to be one of the most haunted places in the world. And in October is when they start their paranormal tours for the public. So I have some different ghost stories here. So this is from onlyinyourstate.com. The title is this abandoned fort in Delaware is one of the most haunted places in the world. So I'm going to quote some of this. So it's not a surprise, quote, it's not a surprise then that many of the 2,700 men who perished in the camp continue to haunt Fort Delaware, seeking to tell their stories to those who walk the haunted halls. The soldiers here participated in and witnessed some of the darkest actions taken on behalf of the U.S. military in treating their prisoners of war so poorly. I often wonder what they would think of modern-day POW regulations and the, quote, rules of war. So continuing on, quote, Fort Delaware is honest about all of its history, including the presence of ghosts, poltergeists, and unruly spirits that walk the prison halls and tunnels. You can take a 5-hour paranormal investigation tour at the fort led by Diamond State Ghost investigators and the park staff. You can, oh, sorry. I keep wanting to like rephrase it, but I didn't realize that I'm quoting it. Hello. Quote, you'll have the chance to witness and participate in a full investigation, seek out spirits in the haunted prison barracks, mess hall, officer's kitchen, ordnance room, officer's quarters, prisoner barracks, and the west end of Endicott section of fort. You'll be split up into small groups of 7 and partnered with a Diamond State ghost investigator as you go lead through all the spooky areas of the fort. At each area, an investigator will be present with EMFs, data recorders, and temperature sensors, and you can bring your own ghost hunting equipment as well. Be warned, participants on this full lake investigation tour have reported feeling the presence of several spirits around them, poking them, and making noises to make themselves known. So I wanted to provide a little bit of history about the Diamond State Ghost investigators because they're a huge part of this. They were formed in 2005 and they really like to take a scientific approach to this. They used to be called the Delaware Ghost Hunters, and then in 2012 they changed their name, and their goal is to help people, and they do it free of charge. So they help with any questions, concerns, fears going on about spiritual activity in like their home and anywhere. They are huge about the research aspect of their work, and they like to come in and give second opinions and help them understand what is going on, who's trying to contact them, things like that. They really thrive on using the latest scientific equipment. They're very knowledgeable and they really make sure that all their results are accurate. They actually do not use the practice of seances and Ouija boards, and they don't endorse using it. They do not want you to. They do not, because they are, again, scientifically oriented, and they like to use up-to-date technology for, to gather data and then be able to have some real concrete evidence to bring back to the person. So it says that they travel the whole mid-Atlantic region, so Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I found this little tidbit that I wanted to include. It does not continue, like it's not up to date, but I thought it was a really cool idea. So I'm like, oh, you guys, they should start this again. But it looks like it has not been since 2012. And it's actually called, it's every May since, yeah, it stopped in 2012. I don't know what's happening, but I thought it was a really cool idea. And it's called, quote, the Escape from Fort Delaware Triathlon. So the participants would actually run the path used by Civil War prisoners who managed to break out and swim across the river, which I thought was really cool. So you would start, they would shuttle you to Fort Delaware, and then you have to jump into the river to reenact. You're reenacting the soldiers going through this. They have to swim back to land, and then that's when they do their bike and run for the rest of the triathlon. I thought that was really cool, but unfortunately, it does not exist anymore, sadly. But yeah, that'd be cool. So let's talk about some more ghosty things. So there were a lot of different prisoners that were housed here. Not only POWs, but they had pirates there. They had war privateers, obviously, political and Confederate soldiers. But a lot of, you still see a lot of these spirits from that time period, based on what they're wearing, if you're able to see. A lot of the pirates were put in some, definitely more punishing conditions than others. And also like very unruly POWs, obviously. Health conditions were awful. There was overcrowding, poor food. All of that led to, immune system, vitamin deficiency, and diseases. So they actually, I didn't mention this up top, but they also did all kinds of inhumane treatment to cause pain, misery, violence, and even death, sadly. So it is believed that there's still a lot of suffering spirits here. They still think they're incarcerated, they want to be free, and they can't get out. They believe they see inmates, prisoners, all that, who died, in horrible ways or still incarcerated, and has produced these restless spirits that they just cannot let go of the world they lived in and, to pass on. So here are some kind of spirit type things that you can encounter. There's a lot of moaning, the sounds of clanging chains from prisoners. And many people see different apparitions, and this is throughout the fort. And they make sure to make themselves known. They kind of dart around. People are poked, they're pulled, and they are, they'll do little things to really show that they're there. And again, they'll see soldiers like trying to flee, if that makes sense. And so there's a lot of residual energy around of these soldiers just being completely trapped in this area. They can also hear cannon and gunfire. Very, very creepy. They also see spirits of the pirates, and they are they're always hanging around different places. It's crazy. One of the rangers said he saw a pirate, and he was dressed in this is how he described it, quote, dressed in a beautiful green silk shirt and white silk pants, looking out a window at the fort, wistfully yearning to be free, perhaps not knowing that he had died. That's kind of sad. In the kitchen area, there's an apparition of a cook that still is seen in there cooking and preparing meals. Again, very, very residual. And they experience footsteps, but they can't see anything. And then they'll hear the clanging of different cooking utensils. And of course, they see spirits of Confederate soldiers. They see them in the old barracks, all over the land. Definitely the land where the barracks had stood previously. And it is speculated that they think that they're just like waiting for the war to be over so they can go home. They're not really accepting that they died here. but they're just, residually still there, still wanting to go home. That's so sad. There's actually a Facebook group. If you want more info, they post every day. It's called Fort Delaware State Park page, and they actually go through, infamous ghost stories there. It's pretty cool. This is one, they say, quote, a common Fort Delaware ghost story is of the 9-year-old drummer boy. The unnamed boy hatched an escape plot. He would escape in a coffin, then before burial, the work detail would open the coffin and he would escape. Sadly for the boy, at the last moment, the work detail was changed and he was buried alive. That's awful. And why would a 9-year-old boy be on this? I don't know. But like they said, there's problems with the story because, why would they open a coffin and let the boy escape? They have records of the youngest prisoner known there was a 10-year-old, and his name was John A. Reed. Sure. After the death of his mother, he traveled with his father, and his father died, and so this boy was captured. And living there, he was fine. He was happy, content, and he was looked after by prisoners and guards, so he was like, the village taking care of him. And we mentioned earlier that there was a story of a prisoner escaping that way, and it said that he was a nurse in the hospital, and he, took over someone's coffin and had himself very lightly nailed in so he could be able to escape. And like I said earlier, he was able to get out, ran, and escaped from them. So that story is off because there are two different stories about the coffin and the young boy, but that is supposedly a very infamous story that runs around there. And there were actually some comments on this post that I wanted to include also. One says, quote, the story of the person in a coffin is a legend, also played out at other similar sites. It's also told that he was on a burial detail during the smallpox epidemic, and that's how he got access. I would love to see any new research that may exist, as I was never able to find corroborating facts. And one other said, quote, hi Laura, this story is reported in the prisoner memoir of D.W.H. Moon, who was a prisoner at Fort Delaware for around 15 months. There may be other attributions to it as well, but that is one I am familiar with. So it's definitely a very big story when it comes to it. Another big story is about Private Stefano. And so he was an Italian immigrant who joined the Union Army, and he became a guard at Fort Delaware. Stefano died slipping and falling down several feet of very wet stairs in the Sally Port area, and he broke his neck and split his skull open, so he died instantly. And he is seen all over that staircase. But there's, again, also contradiction on this one, because they said this is just a story. They have a man named Private George Steffen, who was a German immigrant who enlisted with Company A in Philadelphia. And this private actually did fall to his death, but not on guard duty in the Sallyport. Instead, he fell from the second-story stairs of the men's barracks. And this was the enlisted men, so he was a part of the Union Army. And he was supposed to be reporting in at 9 p.m., and he injured himself and died of his injuries about 3 hours later. So, again, contradicting, but you hear about the Stefano story a lot. And lastly, I want to finish with a little Ghost Hunters episode. So, Ghost Adventures has never been to Fort Delaware, which surprises me because it is super creepy. Ghost Hunters went in 2008, and they did a great job, and they got a lot of creepy stuff. So it really surprises me that Zachy baby didn't go there. So in 2008, ghost hunters went in and they were actually the first investigators to ever investigate Fort Delaware, which is what they said. I do not know if that's true. So they were talking to some of the host reenactors, and was some of their stories. So they will see full apparitions dressed in period clothing. In the mess hall, they see a cleaning woman. She comes in, cleans the mantle of the mess hall, and then she turns and goes into a closet with a door. So goes through the door and then into this closet. But the owner said that one of the rangers said that the wall that's in the closet had been closed up for like 60 plus years. And so they believe that wall, obviously that wall was not there. And so that it is a residual haunt where she's going the way she always went, you know. In one of the stories, they were in the kitchen cooking. And so this woman walks in and lifts the lid off of the pot, checks it out, smells it. She said that she turns to her, smiles, stirs it, puts the lid on, turns, and walks away and just completely disappears. That's insane. That one is hard for me because I think it would take a lot of energy for that entity to be able to pick up a pot and stir it. But guys, you don't know. I think it's a pretty crazy story. Another one of the reenactors was going into the kitchen to get something, and she's standing there, and all of a sudden, one of the doors slams shut, and she cannot get the door open. And then she all of a sudden hears a woman saying, "That's not nice." And she said she could hear the woman say it, and she was super freaked out, couldn't get the door open, and all of a sudden she was able to open it again. There was a very weird story too. There was a visitor who claimed that she was sitting on a bed in a bedroom when the lamp came out of nowhere and it landed at her feet, but she said that something tried to throw the lamp at her. Jay and Grant did kind of debunk that. But so getting on with the investigation, Jay and Grant are in the bedroom with the part about the lamp. They are super skeptical. And if you watch Ghost Hunters, they're always trying to debunk what happens. And just the lamp wasn't there for them. They didn't really believe them. So they're doing EVP and questioning, and the K2 does go off. They ask, "Can you do it again?" And it goes off. They ask a third time, no response. They sit there, ask questions, do more, and just absolutely no response in that room. So they're kind of done in there, not believing the lamp story. Then they go to Joe and Tango, and they're in the tunnels. They heard footsteps, and Joe is, trying to get them to do something, and he was like, "Can you throw a rock?" And then behind them is this huge bang, like scary bang, and it freaks them out, and he was like, well, maybe they actually threw a rock. So they're throwing rocks up against the wall. They had found different stuff in the tunnel, throwing it against the wall, and they're like, nothing sounded like that. Like, where did it come from? What is it? And they were like, we cannot debunk this. This is real. So the tunnels did really well for them. And then Jay and Grant go in the tunnels. They're walking around with a thermal camera, and they're just walking around the entire fort, and it's just voices and crazy sounds everywhere. They actually hear a growl in a low voice and like a very creepy chuckle. So they're standing there, facing down the tunnel, and all of a sudden they see something at the very edge of the tunnel, and they're freaking out. And so Grant rewinds the footage. There's actually a figure that walks out of the tunnel to look at Jay and Grant. Walks out the tunnel and then stands for just a sec, turns around and goes right back where it came from. Full body on the thermal. So creepy. They run down to try and find him. Their K2 is going insane, and they cannot find this person. They cannot debunk it. They checked where everyone was the entire time, just couldn't debunk it. So they decide to set that thermal camera just in the hallway, just looking down exactly where that entity had been. So Jay and Grant now go in the kitchen. They are doing EVP and EMF, and they're just sitting at the table. And so they start, picking up different tools that you bake with and cook bread with, or use on bread. And there's a huge bang, huge, right behind Jay. He literally jumps out of his seat. And again, another thing, they cannot debunk this sound based on everything that's, in the area of where it came from. And at that same exact time, Joe and Tango were in the courtyard. They heard the same thing, the same bang. They kind of went running, trying to make sure everybody's okay. And they get a female EVP that says kitchen. Super, super creepy. Steve and Tango are in the cell blocks, and they can hear, a lot of different sounds and movement, like clothing rubbing against, like when you walk, your pants rub against each other. So Grant, Mark, who was like a guest investigator, and Jay, who is Jason, sorry, I call him Jay. They went to the tunnels again, heard a ton of noises, and Grant swore he saw something in the tunnels. So ghost hunters uses flashlights. Not all the time, but they do. So it's not like Ghost Adventures where it's like pitch black and it's like, how can you see something? But, he had his flashlight on. He swore he saw something. He takes off. The lights in the area are fluctuating. Still couldn't find him. Definitely something, again, he couldn't debunk. So at the end, when they're going over the different data that they had gotten, they got an EVP near the stairway. And so when they went, they heard the story about Stefano falling down the stairs. And so they had all set up for there. And they heard a female that said children. Not sure what that meant, but they did, get an intelligent voice, and you can hear it perfectly. When Joe and Chris were in the mess hall, they were, investigating the cleaner that would come in. They got nothing while they were in there. But they did have an EVP come through that said, show some respect. So creepy. That one gives me the chills because it's like, oh, that doesn't sound like it's a very nice voice. So that one's super creepy. So lastly, they go over the thermal camera that they had set up after their first encounter to look down that tunnel again. And again, you see, has to be the same figure, if not so similar. And it peeks out, around the corner, and you can see its head and shoulders, and it kind of sits there for a little bit and then goes right back in. It's freaky because it just looks like a person, but then it's like it's a super, super creepy. There is a lot of residual haunting there, but at the same time, it's like it's hard to say if this thing was aware of Jay and Grant, when he walked out and he was like, oh crap, and walked back in, or peeking around the corner or something. Like, it's hard to say if it was residual or an actual haunting, but at the end of the episode, the ranger's like, is this haunted? I know you guys work very hard to debunk this, but I need to know, is this place haunted? And just right away, Jason, he was like, yes, this place is haunted. It was scary. It was creepy. Very, very haunted. So that's all I have for today. I know there's a lot of history because Fort Delaware, Delaware City, and Delaware, it all goes back very far. But I hope you enjoyed this. The ghost hunters episode is really good. I highly recommend watching it. Again, it was in 2008, but I didn't write down which episode it was. But it's so creepy seeing that thermal camera, and it was very, very good. Some ones I've done in the past, I'm like, this is so boring. But this one was really, really good. So I watch them on Discovery Plus. That's where I get mine. But yeah, so that is Fort Delaware. If you guys would like to follow me, I have an Instagram at Dark Tales from the Road. I have a Facebook, which the group is called Dark Tales from the Road Podcast. I have a Twitter, Dark Tales FLR from the road. Yeah. So that's my Twitter handle. I have a YouTube where if you prefer to listen to episodes on YouTube, I can't figure out how to record. I don't have any like super cool cameras or anything. I'd have to just record from my phone. Can't figure things out. You know, I'm still a little bit of a newbie here. So, but I do have a YouTube, Dark Tales from the Road podcast. And if you'd rather listen to the episodes there, you can. If you guys could please go to whatever platform you listen from, if you guys could go on and rate and review, I would absolutely love that. If you guys are on Good Pods, that's a great place to rate and review and listen also. So I hope you liked this episode about Fort Delaware in Delaware City, Delaware. It's a lot of Delaware. I know it's not as spooky or creepy as usual, but it was recommended everywhere I looked to be one of the best places to research for, paranormal. So next week's the big episode guide. It is my favorite topic. I've wanted to cover this. I wanted it to be my first episode, but I'm going in order by states. And so finally, we're going to Texas and we're going to talk about the black-eyed children because it's the best. It's my favorite paranormal anything. And I've, I can't even describe how excited I am. Even reading over stories that I've read a million times, I've heard a million times, still so creepy, still get shivers. And if you guys have not heard of them, I'm so excited to bring them to you because they're super creepy. So yeah, next week is Black-Eyed Children. And I think that's all I have for today. Apologize for any rambling, but thank you all so much. And I will see you next week. Bye.